Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Joanna Daniel. I'm a counselor and I live in the UK. I work with, at Wounds to Scars, I work with adult survivors of childhood trauma and women who experience abuse. I've been working with women who experience abuse for nearly 20 years, different kind of women, mostly Christian women. And so this podcast that I'm going to be commenting on is so relevant and important, and I wanted to comment on it, even though part 2 hasn't dropped yet, but I think part 1 was sufficient to give us so much information that we can learn from. And I'm going to call this a masterclass in narcissism or listening to a narcissist. And I do a training that's called Working with Women Who Are Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. And it's such a different type of work. And this interview helps us understand why. So the Dear Future Wifey podcast gave us a masterclass, I believe, yesterday in narcissism. The leader interviewed Derek Jaxn, and I've been watching the podcast, the Dear Future Wifey podcast, from the beginning. I was with him before he got to 100 subscribers. I was one of the early people, and I've stayed throughout the journey. I watch most of the episodes. I look forward to Wednesdays when a new one drops. So usually, because I'm in the UK, a podcast drops while I'm making dinner for the children, and I'll be listening to it while I make dinner. So I love the podcast, love the transparency, the vulnerability that happens. Love how he creates a safe space for people to come and talk. This one, however, was really difficult to watch for many, many reasons. I recommend the Dear Future Wifey podcast to family and friends and clients, and because I believe that so many of us can benefit. I think this episode should be used as a training material, and I certainly will use it in training. I think it should be used as a training material. So I'm going to be looking down because I made notes and I want to just be current with my notes. So yesterday's podcast with Derek Jaxn was very difficult for me to watch, as I said. And in the comments, I saw some women who are healing from narcissistic abuse talk about how difficult it was for them to watch, how triggering it was. And, Latersa wouldn't know Lateris, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I hope I am, wouldn't know to put a trigger warning for women who are healing from narcissistic abuse. Because if you're not familiar with it, then you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know that this would be harmful, this would be considered, there are people who would be hurt by watching it or triggered by watching it. Or even, I just imagine how Danae feels about that. And I hope she doesn't watch it, because if she does, it would be very triggering for her. It doesn't matter which stage you are in your healing journey, something like that would really be extremely triggering. But as I said, it's a masterclass, so we can use it for training. So I remember the video that he did with Danae, that Derek and Danae did after the affair. Now, I never watched Derek's content because I could see that in him, and I just didn't watch his content. I was not his target audience or anything like that. There are people who felt they get value from his content. I never watched. I saw that. And the video that he did with his wife really showed us that he wasn't a man that was living what he was preaching. He was being the kind of person he was talking about. And I suppose that's how he gets to know, because he was that kind of person. But after watching that affair video, when she was, beside him being supportive, I saw that was difficult to watch again. And I knew that this woman was in an abusive relationship. And abuse is many things, right? It's not only hitting. And sometimes we believe that, if I'm not being hit, then it's not abuse. This kind of abuse will make you feel like you've lost your mind. It will make the woman feel like she's lost her mind, like you're imagining things, like your feelings are not valid, like you are somehow, it's you and you need to fix you. And once you're okay, then, everything will be okay. And we see several times throughout the episode where he did that. It was a very difficult episode to watch. I have to say that I wasn't a consumer of his content. Here is what happened. And I know sometimes people blame Danae and say, why didn't she just leave? It takes an average of 7 attempts for a survivor of abuse to leave and stay separated for good, up to 7. And for Christian women, it takes longer, right? So this may sound unbelievable to someone who have never experienced abuse, but this is the norm. This is people lived experiences. It takes up to 7 attempts, longer sometimes, because a Christian woman wants to pray about it, meet with the pastor, do everything fast, forgive. And they think if I forgive and just, okay, let's forgive and just move on, it's going to make changes. But it doesn't change the pattern of behavior that is so deeply ingrained in the narcissist, and the pattern that you would have had too as you learn to live with somebody like that. So he didn't hit her. So is it abuse? He didn't hit her. The way she described the meeting, the way she described their initial meeting and the start of the relationship, and the way he described it, I found extremely interesting. How he described it. I felt that she took a lot of ownership. She was more responsible. She was more accountable. She took ownership for herself. He didn't take any ownership for himself. He will say it, but he'll take it back by blaming her. So he wanted, when he described the start of the relationship, he wanted to come off as this sweet meeting with someone he fell in love with, but it was unconvincing at best because it was cold as well. There was no warmth in his tone, in his body language or anything. There was no warmth at all as he remembered that time when they met. There was no nostalgia. There was nothing. It was just empty and cold. As he was using words that wasn't matching up with the tone of his voice and his body language. Nothing changed. But I believe he wanted to convince the listener that he met this wonderful woman and he fell in love with her. And we know that they're not really capable of falling in love in that way. There was the Dear Future Wifey podcast prides itself on people being vulnerable. There was zero vulnerability here because there was no accountability taken. So this is a podcast where people come to be honest and to tell their truth. I don't believe this was so. There was no responsibility taken. There was lots of rebuttal and excuses. I believe that, as I said, we can study this in training to see how to help women heal. So here are some of the excuses that he gave. I was being rejected and I went to have affairs. Sir, everybody who's been rejected don't have affairs. So the affairs was due to the rejection. I was being pushed away, so I went to somebody else. Now, people of integrity don't do that. And okay, so we can give you a pass. You were young, but we can only give so many passes for the repetitive nature of the pattern that was in this relationship, right? So I was being rejected, so I had an affair. It was not, I made a decision and I cheated and I was never faithful. That's how people take responsibility. That didn't come at all. I was never faithful. I cheated on her. It wasn't okay. I was being rejected over and over again. She pushed me away, and I am afraid of rejection because my father left and my mother had a new boyfriend, and rejection, we're all wired for rejection. We all live with it. We all deal with it. We don't all go off and be unfaithful and not people of integrity. Now, this is not, he's in therapy. He gave his life to Christ and he's in therapy. And I think that's a recipe for change and change behavior and healing. And I really do hope he get healing because I really hope he doesn't do this to anybody else. For me, it was the way that he showed, he said the way I showed love was rough. And it was, she pulled away. She didn't speak to me. And I thought, poor guy, like I showed love rough, and I would, go up behind her and show love rough. And because she had experienced that sexual assault, then that wasn't okay for her. I needed to learn the way that she responded to love, the way she responded to me. She pushed me away. And I know this is classic. Oftentimes the narcissist will blame their partner's past trauma for the way the relationship is. So the way he behaves was as a result of her sexual assault and her problems with rejection because her dad left. It wasn't behaviors that he had. It wasn't patterns that he developed. It wasn't things that he did. It was a reactive thing. It was her past sexual assault, her father leaving, she pushed me away. I went off and have affairs. I am not responsible. I'm not honorable. I made a decision. I cheated. So it wasn't also, I didn't have good communication skills and I wasn't mature enough to learn what was happening and understand myself enough to be the man that could love her. It was, she didn't communicate. She shut down. She pushed me away. I left. And okay, so he also wanted sympathy told us that he took the relationship in the beginning early to God and pray over the relationship. Now, you took a woman to God and you treated her like that. You're responsible to God for that, my friend. You are responsible So he wanted some sympathy. And that's again a classic thing. I wanted sympathy. I wanted to be liked. So first he tried in the beginning to tell us, how he met and fell in love with this amazing woman. She was beautiful, her shape and all of that. And then he told us, that's a nice thing, isn't it? And this is what the podcast is all about. It's like, we found this amazing partner, we pray. And so he wanted us to believe that he found this amazing woman and took her to God. He prayed over the relationship like, wow. That's classic again. So if you line up all of his behavior, everything that he says, and the man that we've known him to be because of what he's shown to the world, we will know that everything is not adding up, right? So then again, more blame. My father left. My mom got a boyfriend and stopped tucking me in. Now, of course, we know that abandonment creates patterns of behavior. We know that things in childhood. I work with childhood trauma. I know that. I work with men. I work with women. I know that it creates pattern of behavior. But one of the things that is important is for people to take responsibility for their own actions. We can't blame other people for our responses. We have to learn how to understand what was my response? What was my responsibility? What did I do? How did I contribute? What I heard was lots of, as I say, rebuttal and blame. And, the interviewer, Laterra asked, she said this, basically what do you say? And that's one of the reasons why lots of women who experience narcissistic abuse get wounded in therapy, get wounded in pastoral care, especially when they're trying to listen to both and hear the other side of the story. The other side of the story when you're dealing with a narcissist is never going to be honoring of the victim's story, ever. It's not going to honor it. And so that's what I found difficult, because it was never going to be honoring. So we like to say there are two sides to every story, and he has a story. Of course he has a story, but his story is going to be, unless he's healed and way further along in his journey of conversion and healing, he is never going to honor her experience. It's always going to be, she did this and I did that. Always. Let me tell you my story. Let me tell you my truth. A man who would have been healed, his truth would have been, I did this, I am this, this is my responsibility, this is what I did, not trying to tell his side of the story to anything. Because he would stand firmly in the discomfort of his story, meaning my pattern of behavior, my responsibility, the things I did, my actions, my lack of communication, my poor conflict resolution skills, everything. They stand in it, in the discomfort of it. That's what they would do. There would be no, let me tell you my side. Let me tell you what I did. It wouldn't be none of that. He blamed his wife throughout the interview. I wasn't cheating, and she accused me. Like the time when he talked about her truth, what did he call it? Her truth box that she and her friends set up. And that time he wasn't cheating that time, maybe a week, we don't know how long. And so there was gaslighting. And I can imagine how that argument that had happened after, when he said he was responding to questions, but he could hear ping in the next room. This woman knew. Women always know. There's intuition. We always know. So the gaslighting, though, may have resulted in the argument, because he was still doing it on the podcast. I wasn't cheating at that time, and she accused me. But sir, but you were. And so what you should have done in that confrontation is admit that you were, is validate her intuition, is validate the feelings that drove her to set up this truth box thing that she set up. And if you had done that there's several places throughout where the relationship could have turned a corner if only he had taken responsibility. But now that, no doubt, the gaslighting resulted in the argument, because I heard it when he was talking, like, I wasn't cheating at that time and she was trying to trick me. And if you were an honorable man, then she wouldn't have been doing that. It's the history that you have, the history that the relationship has that set that up. How could you have an honesty box? How could you have an honesty box when I'm cheating this week or this month or this last fortnight? I wasn't cheating. Why are you trying to trip me up? So a person who is really remorseful would say, I understand the fears and the needs that may have driven you to that. But I want you to know that it's in the past. I'm 1 month I'm 1 month clean. I'm 1 month not cheating. I am 1 month not doing anything. And I want to keep doing this. I want to keep honoring the relationship. I want to keep being an honorable person. Okay, so he wasn't then. He wasn't emotionally intelligent. He didn't have the communication, the capacity to communicate in that way. He didn't have those skills. But now that you're in therapy, and now that you know the Lord, and now that you're doing it, take responsibility for it. And so when you tell the story, don't frame it in a way that she did something wrong. Frame it in a way that take responsibility for what you did. And that's how we would have known that this man is changing. This man's doing something different. But that didn't tell us that. It just told us that you blamed her. So there was some other blame. I'm begging her to tell me what's happening. After a week, I checked out. After a couple of weeks, I checked out. After I was begging her to tell me. It's all her fault that I checked out. Now, I've been married for 18 years. I know the result of withdrawal. There are many people in this world. We respond in different ways. There's some of us who we naturally withdraw. Some are more prickly and sprightly and we'll talk and have conversations. We have different frame of reference. We were socialized differently. We grew up in different homes. We've had different experiences. So some of us have to learn how to communicate. We don't know. So when you're in a relationship and somebody, their pattern of relating is to shut down and withdraw, sometimes there is a pursue, and this sometimes speaks to attachment as well, and attachment difficulties, where the fearful avoidant and the anxious person, oftentimes they attract each other. The fearful avoidant is, I want love, I'm afraid of it, I'm going to withdraw because I don't trust people to love me. Danae, we know her father left and we don't know, and we know she experienced sexual trauma. So attachment, we know she had experienced broken attachment, and here he is saying that he experienced broken attachment too. So those were the attachment difficulties that was interacting, right? She was interacting in her blueprint, and he in his blueprint, coupled with cheating and infidelity and manipulation and gaslighting, which makes for a toxic relationship. But we can't blame her for it, for you checking out, right? You checked out because that's your pattern of responding. That's your pattern of behavior. You checked out. And so you have to say, this is how I relate and respond. Because my friend, you will be checking out in other relationships too. In your interpersonal relationships, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing all around. So she's not the reason you checked out. You checked out. And anybody who's listening to this, we check out because it's our pattern of relating and responding. When we learn a new pattern, when we understand that and we do the work of healing, then we can respond in different ways. So then we learn now how to be vulnerable. We learn the courage of vulnerability. And so we will say, I noticed that. We'll ask questions and we'll push ourselves out there a little bit more if the relationship is safe enough to do it. Don't do this with a narcissist. If you're with somebody who you have identified to be, don't try this level of vulnerability, because anything you do and say will be used against you, as we see Derek Jaxn do throughout this interview. Okay, she checked out. So communication is key, but you're not communicating, he says. So was it she's the only one who was supposed to be communicating? Like, communication is key, but you're not communicating. I'm trying to communicate, but you're not communicating, and it's key, so I checked out. Let's blame her for the checking out. He said, I would do things and didn't know that it bothers her. And again, the flirting was a massive classic narcissist move, right? It was so classic. It would be like him. I would flirt and I didn't know that bothered her. You know, there was nothing funny about this interview, but that bit was really funny. I would flirt, but I didn't know that this would bother her. You are in a relationship where I'm assuming that you have both chosen to be faithful to each other, and you didn't know that it would bother her that you flirt. So here is how he gaslit her and blamed her for his flirting. He said, then he gave her responsibility to fix it. He said, I would flirt, I'm a flirty guy, I would flirt, and she would be upset about it, but never said anything. Sir, you are a man of integrity. or not, you would know that that's not okay. So the narcissist will flirt in front of their partners. And here's what they'll do when they're confronted. They'll accuse their partners of being jealous or tell them that they're getting it wrong. They'll deny everything, even though you know what you've seen. And so maybe her silence was also about being, at this point, there's no point in saying anything because you do it so many times that I know that you're going to tell me that I imagine it. I know that you're going to minimize it. As he did, he minimized it. I know that you're going to minimize it. I know that you're going to tell me that it's in my head. So what's the point? So here is what Derek could have said. I used to flirt in front of her. I realized that it was disrespectful of me to flirt in front of my girlfriend or my wife. And I shouldn't have done it. But instead, what he said was, flippantly, and I was this kind of person. I used to flirt. He minimized it and he blamed her for not calling him out on his flirting. Classic again. But he knows exactly what he was doing because the narcissists, they use flirting as a tool to manipulate, as a tool to, it reduces self-esteem, and they know it. They use it very well as a tool, very cleverly. It's a manipulative tactic. But he knows exactly what he was doing. She would also know that denial and blame accompanies any conversation or any calling out. So she would have known that. And if he said it's a habit coupled with cheating, she will be in a chokehold of low self-esteem by this point. So comparing herself, as we know she said before, to the other women. So flirting is deliberate with a narcissist. Flirting is, they do it to make their partner jealous. They do it to see if their partner is going to become possessive and, defend and protect. And we know that his insecure attachment pattern, his abandonment issues would also influence those behaviors. Not that it's okay, but sometimes that's an explanation for what happened. It's a game. Flirting is a game for them. It's a game. But it's also extremely damaging to a woman's self-esteem and a woman's sense of self. It's also really disrespectful as well. Flirting is a test. It's an attention-seeking behavior. And sometimes it puts women against each other. And sometimes that's why they do it as well. So when also he talks about her being reactive. He talks about her being upset and name-calling and withdrawing in the conversation. And also we know that sometimes women who have been living in this situation for a long time become reactive. We know that when she's had enough and she's unable to take anymore, it comes out in anger often. And this happens usually when the narcissist does something so obnoxious that the partner reacts in anger. Then they can act innocent and guilt-free. And now the anger is the focus as opposed to the obnoxious behavior. Happens all the time, really, really much, really all the time. As he said, it's not like she don't talk, but in upset and name calling. So he's pressing home the point that she's a poor communicator. And that's why I do some of the things I do, because she communicates poorly. He wants us to believe that very much. He called her a liar without calling her a liar. Straight out, he said, I remember this differently. Again, he wants us to believe that he is a person who is honest, but here is a place where she lied, and therefore you can't trust anything she says. He says, I believe that differently. In other words, I believe she's lying, and I will use this incident to cast doubt over the story. That's what that's saying. But later on, as they were talking about, as Lateris asked some more questions, he said, she told me that nothing sexual happened. But in the beginning, if you get fixated on the fact that, she lied about that means, can I believe anything that she says? Maybe I need to believe him a little bit more. But he confirmed later on that she did say that nothing happened, nothing sexual happened. And she did tell us that she used it as a way to get him jealous, which it seems she achieved it. Although it's very difficult to get them jealous because they're so selfish and self-centered that it would really take a lot. He did a lot of casting doubt on her story while occasionally dropping in things he was doing that was good. Like, I did a nonprofit, I prayed over the relationship, I stopped cheating for a week. That was littered throughout the conversation. He didn't express And he says, I'm very affectionate. I'm very affectionate. So that time when I went up to hug her, when you've been cheating on a woman and when you have manipulated and gaslighted, and then you're saying, I'm very affectionate, she's not going to want to be affectionate, because her mind is clouded with all the other stuff. So your affection would need to be demonstrated and backed up by a lot of behavior change for that affection to be viewed as genuine affection and not something that was going to lead to lovemaking. He said this part, when we went to therapy, he said, and he was really upset that she was bringing up the past when they went to therapy, because we wanted to move on, but she can't move on. Years of manipulation, years of gaslighting, years of flirting, years of lying. There's nobody that can be in a relationship and is cheating and is not lying and is not manipulative and not gaslighting and not blaming and not taking responsibility and accountability. Years of that is abuse piled on top of each other. You can't go to therapy and that is in the past and we'll never discuss it anymore, because you are the person that did it. So for the relationship to move forward, that needs to come into the room, because it's in the room and we need to deal with everything that's in the room, everything. So the narcissists often blame their partner or anyone for their behavior because they didn't have the capacity to understand the truth of their own actions. And here is why it's dangerous. And women who experience narcissistic abuse and go to couples therapy often leave wounded and hurt. And I hope this interview wasn't wounding to Danae. And if the backlash is harsh against Derek Jaxn, he's going to blame their Future Wifey podcast for the questions and for being favorites and all of that kind of stuff, because they don't take responsibility. Throughout this interview, I know that people want to hear his side of the story. We know his side of the story. We didn't need him to say anything, because he's lived it through his content throughout the many years. He's lived it through his behavior, through the affairs, through the lying and the manipulation. He lived it. And so it's often really harmful and damaging to women when we're hearing the other side of the story. What we can do is create safe spaces for women who experience narcissistic abuse to heal. And we can keep that space safe and sacred for them and them alone, to provide healing for them, to let the partner get healing somewhere else. And I know this is Latersa's journey. He's on the search for love, and I love the podcast. I think this should have come with a trigger warning. Of course, you don't know to provide a trigger warning when you don't understand abuse and you don't understand the dynamics of abuse and how a narcissist operates. It's easy to make these kind of, I'm going to call it a blunder, make these kind of mistakes because you think you're doing a good thing by hearing the other side of the story. But also when it is abuse, the other person telling a story, unless they've done years of healing, it's going to always damage the victim. And it's also going to be triggering for a large portion of your audience. And I know this is your journey again, and you are on the search for love, and maybe you can learn something from this. As I said in the beginning, it's a masterclass. We all can learn something from it. I think this can be used in training when we're trying to teach other people about how the narcissists operate. And I really do hope that Derek will get help. I really hope that he will stick with God and therapy, and he'll be honest in those spaces, because that's the journey that will help him to heal. I really hope that anybody who was triggered by the episode will also get support so that they can unpack the things that came up for them. I see some comments on Instagram on the Dear Future Wifey page where, people were commenting, and there other people were saying, but he's showing who he is. And he was really showing us who he is. And if you're in a relationship with somebody like that, believe the patterns that you see. Forgiveness, don't fix it. It won't fix it. And there is no leaving the past behind, and let's move forward again. Couples therapy is not recommended. It's, and even somebody who is skilled in working with narcissists and narcissistic abuse will not do couples therapy. They will do a long period with one individual, another period with another individual, before they can assess if it's safe to bring the couples together. I know these two went to couples therapy, and I know pastors aren't always trained to spot abuse, and so they won't always know that what they're doing is going to be is going to cause injury to the victim. And it sounds like she came out of that situation and nothing changed, and nothing changed, and it sounds like he was upset because she brought up the past, and the person who was counseling them was saying, you don't say anything. I was angry at him, and he was offended by that because he thought he was coming into a space that was going to help them. He needs a lot of healing, a lot of work. But once again, when somebody show you who they are, really believe it. Really know that there's nothing that you can do to change their behavior. You can't change enough for somebody else to change because they're who they are. And we have to believe it. Was this a wonderful opportunity to give him a chance to tell his side of the story? I don't believe so. But again, it's their future wifey, that it's within it's their platform. They can do that. And it's Laterissa's journey. But we learned a lot from this episode, a lot of what not to do, a lot of how to understand the narcissist and how they operate. We learn a lot from that. And again, once again, I'm going to end with this. If you know that you're in a situation like that, please get support, please get help. We know that according to research, domestic abuse is the second leading cause of death for Black women in America. And we know that, I mean, the UK, the statistics are as dire, and we know that we should protect women, we should listen to women, we should create safe spaces for women to heal. Doesn't mean that men don't need to heal too, but when something is as troublesome and problematic as it is, we have to really look after victims, and I wish more people were doing that. Thank you for joining me, and take good care.